What do you know about medieval women? It's probably quite a lot if you're watching this channel. What about medieval female prisoners? When her jailers came up with what they thought was the perfect way of breaking her and getting her to cooperate. They brought in an axe and threatened to cut off her nose and ears. But when they did so, they didn't kill her. Instead, they bandaged her wounds and allowed her to live. And then they went out into the marketplace and paraded her around as an example to others. It was here in the year 1325 that a woman named Else encountered some trouble with the law. She was charged with the crime of heresy, likely due to her attending executions of people accused of witchcraft. While this was probably more of a crime of association than anything else, it didn't stop her from being thrown in prison. Now that's a topic that has seen far less attention. During her time locked up, she became known throughout the city as a witch. However, while the king clearly loved his son, he also didn't want him to get too powerful. Henry appointed him to a series of positions that had no real power, such as Constable of the Tower of London. But this wasn't enough to keep him in the lifestyle to which he had become accustomed. And so he began plotting to depose his cousin, the new king, Edward VI, and take the throne for himself. Unfortunately, his plans were discovered, and he was arrested. All the while, he kept him in luxurious accommodations inside the tower. But her ordeal was far from over. Because she had been tortured, she required medical treatment. Unfortunately, she was too poor to pay for this, and so she was forced to beg on the streets of Paris. She wandered around the city for years. They were sometimes tortured in ways that we can't even imagine today, and often their punishments were far harsher than those handed down to men. Calling out the names of those who had tortured her, begging for them to pay for her medical treatment. This meant that Henry Fitzroy enjoyed a lifestyle of luxury, but he never really got to see his father, who ruled over England from Windsor Castle, which was at the time part of the Kingdom of Hungary. There was a woman named Katerina Upova. She worked as a servant in the household of the castle's governor, and was well liked by the family until one day she was accused of stealing. While we don't know exactly how she was executed, however, the punishment that she received was anything but. She was kept there for 4 months without food or water, only receiving her sustenance through the small amount of bread that people would throw into her cell. Which of these daughters of the dungeon do you think had it the worst? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. As always, thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more content. She was so badly beaten that she died shortly after being removed from prison. She was stripped naked and flogged, receiving 10 strokes of the whip. This caused terrible injuries and even blinded her. Thanks in part to all of his wives and mistresses bearing him children in quick succession. With Henry unable to rule, his son was brought to his bedside. But unfortunately, it was too late. The king died soon afterwards, and his will ensured that his illegitimate son would not inherit any of his wealth or titles. And so Henry Fitzroy was left destitute. Here in the year 1466, a woman named Isabeau de Bavre was imprisoned in the Bastille. She had been arrested for allegedly cursing the Duke of Burgundy, a crime which carried a heavy penalty in medieval France. We do know that her death was particularly cruel and humiliating. Her body was burned and then thrown into the Rhine River. From here, he was sent to France, where he died of cancer at the age of 28. Like his father before him, he never got to enjoy a peaceful death. He was buried in an unknown location so that his grave would never become a site of pilgrimage. Not only was she denied proper treatment in light of her condition, but she was also tortured in an effort to extract a confession from her. Even after she gave birth to a baby boy, she was kept in prison. Her child was taken away from her and placed in the care of someone else. Her head was cut off and hung from a beam in the marketplace as an example to others. Even centuries later, people would still tell stories about Else and the terrible things that happened to her.
Ow!
While many believe that these tales are nothing but superstitious nonsense, others believe that they are based in reality. Even though she was never actually convicted of practicing witchcraft, the guards hated her and often threw her into the dungeon without any food. Once they even left a small girl down there with her to die of starvation. While the child quickly passed away, Else survived by eating nothing but bread and drinking water from a nearby well. Join me today as we explore 5 of the most interesting daughters of the dungeon, the untold stories of medieval female prisoners. For our first story, we can head over to the Iberian Peninsula in the year 981. in the city of Toledo, which was at the time under Muslim rule. While the king is famous for having 6 wives, he also had a son who was born out of wedlock, who acted as his wet nurses and raised him as their own. While this arrangement worked out very well for little Henry, it was eventually discovered by the king. He ordered that his illegitimate son be brought to him, and from that point forward, Henry VIII took on the role of father. This was Henry Fitzroy, born in 1519 to the king and his longtime mistress Elizabeth Blount. The young man's mother originally tried to hide the pregnancy, but when the baby was born, it was clear that the secret was out. There lived a woman named Donna Garsend. She was a viscountess from the kingdom of Asturias, who had been captured by the forces of Almanzor, a general of the Muslim Caliphate of Cordoba.
Nice.
Her husband had tried to rally the Christian kingdoms of the north against their Muslim overlords, but he had been defeated and killed in battle. So now his widow found herself behind bars. She was kept as a prisoner for 2 years in an Islamic jail, where she not only endured beatings but also torture. But despite being horribly disfigured, she refused to cooperate. Eventually, she was sent to the court of Almanzor. She impressed him with her intelligence and wit, and because of this, rather than executing her or returning her to the Christians, he decided to marry her. This didn't mean that she got to go free. However, instead of being imprisoned in a dank cell, she was now in an opulent palace. While she may have had nicer surroundings, however, it doesn't sound like she had much more freedom. She wasn't allowed to leave the house and spent her days weaving tapestries. She did, however, bear Almanzor several children, one of whom would go on to become famous in her own right. After her father died in 991, Almanzor seized the throne of Cordoba and ruled as the first king of the new emirate of Sevilla. While she might not have been able to enjoy any of her father's power, she certainly must have felt some pride knowing that he had been able to take the throne after having been a lowly prisoner just a few years earlier. For our next story, we can head across Europe to the Holy Roman Empire in the city of Cologne. In fact, she wouldn't be released for nearly 17 years. After 17 years, she was finally brought before the court. She was found guilty and sentenced to death. For our next story, we can head over to England in the reign of King Henry VIII. So she sent him to live with the Earl and Countess of Wiltshire. He gave him a dukedom and showered him with expensive gifts. This all changed when Henry VIII fell ill in 1547. He had long suffered from ill health. In order to make money, he sold many of the expensive gifts that his father had given him. He was thrown into the Tower of London, the place that he had once called home. For our next story, we can head across the Channel to France and the city of Paris. However, her time in prison was made significantly worse by the fact that she was pregnant. Eventually, she was released from prison. For our final story, we can head over to what is today Slovakia in the year 1575, in the castle of Bratislava. While it's not clear what the value of the item was, it was likely something of little worth. When this wasn't enough to break her, she was thrown into prison. As you can see, medieval women could find themselves imprisoned for a wide variety of crimes. Now it's time to hear from you.